Now, the 3 Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And happy Monday to everybody. I am Rich McFadden in for Greg Corombos along with Jim Garrity from National Review. To start your martinis out for the week, and Monday never disappoints, Jim. We've always got a couple of doozies, and here we are again on a Monday with a couple of good ones. Well, as usual, the good, the bad, and the crazy. So let's start out with the good, and looks like the Gorsuch vote may not get any fights. It may just go through.
Yeah. So the Democratic Judiciary Committee member said he does not intend to filibuster Neil Gorsuch's Supreme Court nomination. Ideally, Republicans will get 9 Democrats in agreement. You have 52 Republicans, all of whom love Neil Gorsuch. Throw in the 9, you got 61 votes. That's enough to get rid of the filibuster. Democrats would not be able to sustain the filibuster, and thus Republicans don't need to nuke it. Now, from where I sit, where a lot of Republicans sit, look, Democrats, the ball's in your court. If you guys want a filibuster, we can nuke it. We can nuke it anytime you want. Mitch McConnell has the key around his neck. So does John Kyle. They will turn it. They will enter the nuclear codes, and that is the end of the filibuster for Supreme Court nominations forever. There are a certain number of Democrats who are saying, look, if we're going to have this fight, why do this for Neil Gorsuch, who's replacing Scalia? Save this for a future one. Now, right. I think it's pretty clear, Rich, you can nuke it now or you can nuke it later. But chances are, the day that 41 Democrats hold together and say, no, we're not going to let this guy's nomination go forward, the filibuster is getting nuked one way or the other. It looks like Leahy wants to put this off. And look, the less Democratic resistance you get now, the better. The other intriguing thing is how this kind of ties into our third martini, but the Democratic base wants Democratic lawmakers to fight Republicans on every conceivable front possible. And it'd be interesting to see if Leahy gets some negative feedback and some grief and aggravation from the lefty grassroots for what they will see as a surrender. I'm sure Leahy just sees as simple common sense.
And especially coming off, and this leads into our second martini with the healthcare win for them. Does this make that base even more want to go after every single thing? Why give up? We just won. Why are you just letting this pass?
Absolutely. Imagine being them. You've been high-fiving all weekend. Things are feeling terrific. You come in Monday morning, and Leahy's saying, yeah, I'm not filibustering.
Right. So what kind of how will their base see this, the one that really wants to fight everything? Will they start having problems, much like the GOP base is splintered up and having problems?
Oh, I would expect so. Now, here's the thing. Now, Leahy's not up for re-election anytime soon, and you're not likely to see, any giant, primary challenges to him or anything like that. He's getting up there in years. I believe he's 76. The chances of him running for re-election are not terribly likely. But look, I mean, this is if nothing else, this is a dress rehearsal for the next Supreme Court fight, and we don't know how many we're going to have in the coming years. It's you could have 1, you could have 2, you could possibly even have 3, depending on how everyone's health holds up there and whether they feel like retiring. So we'll see how it shakes out. But as much as the Democrats are feeling good this morning, they're probably going to see a bunch of cases where they feel like the Democrats aren't fighting back hard enough, and you might see some unusual figures like Leahy getting absorbing some of their ire.
Well, we mentioned it a minute ago, and it leads into our second martini. All the Democrats are sitting back fat and happy with their stogies and their martinis and celebrating their win on everybody, the GOP just pulling back on repeal and replace. And we're hearing a couple of different things. We're hearing let's just give up on this for now and attack it again later, which could be really bad. And then we're also hearing Trump saying, hey, maybe I'll go to the other side of the fence and see what they can do for me.
Yeah. I mean, the bad martini, there's a part of me that can't quite get my head around the idea of the Republicans saying, look, we tried. We spent a whole 17 days trying to get this passed. It didn't work out. Oh, well. Trump had made a comment on Friday that he was glad to have this behind him.
Right.
What? Wait,
right.
No. You didn't get your reforms through. It's the opposite of having it behind you. It's still ahead of you. I can completely understand if they said, look, we got to go back to the drawing board. We have to come up with a plan that will get 218 votes in the House and can get enough votes in the Senate. I think at the core of this is that there is the question of, look, there's a bunch of ideas Republicans would like to enact. Tort reform, selling across state lines, big things like that, that you can't do through reconciliation, which means you're going to have to get it through the Senate, which means you're going to have to get 60 votes unless you decide to nuke the filibuster for legislation. For obvious reasons, Mitch McConnell, a lot of other Republicans are wary about that. And people might say, they're a bunch of cowards. Well, look, if you nuke the filibuster, it means it's nuked for you when you're in the minority, too.
Exactly.
And should Republicans keep control of the Senate in the midterms? Yeah, but I'm sure there are a lot of Republicans who probably felt that way and heading into the 2006 midterm cycle as well. There's not a if you do this, you find yourself in a circumstance in which you really have no power to influence what goes through the Senate when you're in the minority. Democrats found themselves on the losing end of this stick with their Trump cabinet, where they had a lot of people who didn't support people like Betsy DeVos or folks like that. But in the end, they needed 50 votes to stop it. Actually, 51 votes to stop it, and they just couldn't get there. For obvious reasons, there are Senate Republicans who don't like the prospect of someday being in the minority and having absolutely no ability to influence anything. If you keep the filibuster, at least you got that option.
Well, and let's look at that. I mean, what are the options, or what are the chances of them being in the minority if they can't get the thing that they hung their hat on even close to getting passed? They could be in trouble.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's always a mistake to assume how the midterm is going to shake out. A lot of, just ask Bill Frist.
Right.
Just go back in history. Just ask Harry Reid how these midterms are going to turn out. So there's that. And the other thing is that there's the whole idea of the administration's three-phase plan. We're going to pass one part now, which was phase one. Phase 2 will come in regulatory changes they make at the Department of Health and Human Services by Tom Price. And Phase 3 was stuff like tort reform and selling across state lines. And that would come once there were a bunch of Democrats who were never, ever going to vote for anything repealing Obamacare, which I think is a reasonable assumption. Mm-hmm. But there were some Democrats who would eventually come around to once they needed a replacement, they'd want to vote for stuff like this, particularly the red state Democrats who were up in 2018.
Right.
That always struck me as a gamble. That always struck me as throwing out a rope and hoping it catches on to something. Because, could you get a couple of them? Sure. But remember, you got 52 votes and you need 60. You'd have to get 8 Democrats voting into this kind of stuff. And it always, if you're a House Republican, they're asking you to make that leap of faith for Phase 3, and Phase 3 might not come. And if you don't have Phase 3, then do you really bring down prices? That competition between more insurers, what's supposed to bring down state lines, tort reform, the idea of getting rid of these ambulance chasers, driving up the cost of malpractice was supposed to be a big part of it. If you don't do that stuff, then maybe the premiums don't come down. If the premiums don't come down, people are angry. They take it out on the party that enacted their version of healthcare reform.
Right.
So,
without a Phase 1, is there even a Phase 2 and a Phase 3 anymore?
Republicans are trying to work their way around.
So without a Phase 1, is there even a Phase 2 or a Phase 3 anymore?
Well, I put that question out to a couple of people this weekend. The message was, well, look, the regulations don't work nearly as well if you don't have it's 3 legs of the stool, right? It's 3 things that all need to work interchangeably to help bring down the cost of premiums and not have lots of people losing their insurance and not being able to afford any alternatives and things like that. So they're kind of stuck right now. I still think go back to the drawing board, fine. But this talk you're hearing of look, it's off the table for the foreseeable future. Guys, you don't get to run on something for 7 years and then say, yeah, it didn't work out. So sorry.
What a
happening.
mess.
Yeah.
All right. And that leads us into our crazy
Martini.
Martini.
Then you are going to lose the House and Senate in 2018.
Exactly. So that leads us into our crazy Martini for the day. I mean, we look at how this went down. And does anybody really think Trump is like, hey, maybe I'll go work with the Democrats? I mean, come on now. Does anybody really think there's going to be any bipartisanship going forward?
Yeah, this is the kind of the new buzz coming out of the White House this weekend. It's like, well, the House Freedom Caucus was really difficult. We think they were obstinate and unreasonable. So fine, we're going to take our ball and we're going to go over and we're going to play with the Democrats.
Right.
And there was one report that the Congressional Black Caucus, they thought there was an option of building a coalition there. Other ones. Now, look, you could very easily have seen the beginning of the Trump administration. Day one, Trump and Chuck Schumer getting together. They actually do have a long time, at least donor-senator relationship. I don't know if it's necessarily a close personal relationship between the two. But it seems like they understand each other. And look, a lot of conservatives, like myself, were afraid that, Chuck Schumer was going to play this very shrewdly and say, Donald, we have a long time relationship. Let's work together on infrastructure. Ivanka's got a great idea on this mandatory maternity leave. And that they would play to all of Trump's not so conservative policy positions, and the Democrats would actually get a lot done that they wanted to get done, ironically, under a Republican president. Well, the first 10 weeks of this administration, Trump has not endeared himself to the Democrats, and I think it's pretty clear the Democrats have not endeared themselves to Trump. And as we talked about a bit with the Gorsuch vote, the Democratic grassroots loathes Trump with the passion of 1,000 suns going supernova. So the idea that any Democrats are going to reach out and say, okay, Donald, now we're ready to work together, I just don't see that happening. My boss, Rich Lowry, kind of looked at this and said, look, on paper, Trump should be the kind of Republican who is a natural, should be able to work with Democrats,
right,
but he won't be able to pull it off in practice based on how the administration and his character and his style and his tone has worked so far. That, for Democrats, there's just too much risk in being seen as being, Trump's favorite Democrat.
So how is the art of the deal working out so far? I mean, this New York brash kind of I'm going to go in and do it my way deal making. How's that working inside the Beltway?
I had a piece that went up Friday, and I kind of elaborated on this morning, Rich. That look, the House Freedom Caucus, we can argue about whether they were reasonable or unreasonable, or whether they had, whether they expected too much out of this or not. Different conservatives are going to come down different ways. But it sounds like when they went into these meetings with the Trump in the White House, they explained, well, we're concerned about the kind of requirements we have. And what we expect from in the kind of what the requirements on insurance companies and this kind of community rating of how much they're allowed to increase premiums and stuff. And Trump said, I'm going to clean this up for the sake of our family podcast. Don't worry about the little stuff, except he didn't say stuff. And I guess maybe to Trump that seemed like the little stuff.
Right.
To the people in front of him, it wasn't little stuff. That was their criteria of whether this was a good bill or not. And just because it seems unimportant to you, like if you need to get somebody from no to a yes, right, you have to at least understand why they see it as important. And you have to, presumably, figure out some way to get them to come on ground. I wrote this in the piece Friday that, look, it's not that Republicans didn't want to see these Republicans didn't want to see Trump succeed. It's not that they weren't worried about losing or keeping the majority in 2018. It's not that they didn't fear primary challenges. They just didn't think it was a good bill. And until you address that, you weren't going to get them to yes. And it seems like these negotiations kept going in circles in which Trump just really didn't know or didn't care, honest to goodness, in the words of some unnamed GOP aide in Politico, about what the details were. Well, the old saying, the devil is in the details. The details mattered to these guys. And until Trump, so I think the art of the deal. Look, the sales pitch for Trump was he was this great deal maker.
Right.
Well, if he doesn't pay attention to what the other side wants, I don't think you're that good a deal maker.
Well, and that's the dilemma that we face now. So let's see when he walks across the other side of the street whether anybody actually listens, and whether they do anything. Because right now, it's a dumpster fire. And he needs to make sure that somebody's standing there with a fire extinguisher.
The good news about hitting bottom is you've got nowhere to go but up.
Right, exactly. I mean, hey, take what you learned, go in there and see if you can do something with tax reform, and hopefully get somewhere. And then you go back to healthcare and try again once you've learned something. But take what you've learned and move forward. So.
And bingo. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Jim. Thank you so much. There's your Monday Martinis. You're good, you're bad, and you're crazy. And we will be right back here tomorrow for your Tuesday Martinis. That's Jim Garrity with the National Review Online. And I am Rich McFadden from the Radio American Network saying have a great day.